This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Franny's Pharmacy.
Now more than ever, it's important that our society focuses more on our mental and physical health. At Franny's Pharmacy, the team is committed to their community's need of being happy, healthy, and stress-free. Come learn how Franny's Pharmacy can assist you in a clean, professional environment with their expert bud tenders that are excited to educate you about the benefits of their lab-tested, DEA-certified CBD products. Franny's Pharmacy also offers wholesale and franchise opportunities. Visit their website at frannysPharmacy.com, and that's pharmacy with an F, and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Again, that's Franny's Pharmacy with an F.com and use the promo code CannaConnect10 for an exclusive Cannabinoid Connect discount. Franny's Pharmacy, putting the farm back into pharmacy. Jesse Campoamor, what's going on, my man?
How's it going, brother? Good to be here, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, yeah. I'm excited to have you on today, man. You're a veteran political operative in the cannabis space with over a decade of experience working in Governor Cuomo's office. We kind of talked about that before we started recording.
Sure, yeah.
Let's start there, Jesse. I mean, talk to us about what led you to become a veteran political operative?
And what does that even mean?
Right.
But finish your question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just what led you, and I want to hear some of your experiences and where you're at today. What brought you here today?
Absolutely. It was funny is, politics, people in politics like to use a lot of comparisons to like paramilitary organizations and call themselves operatives, which is a word that you hear sometimes with in JSOC and like the special forces kind of lingo, and we like to fit ourselves kind of to those comparisons. What I am and what I kind of people ask me, what do I do for a living, what's my role. I like to describe it in a couple of different ways. Sometimes I tell people, listen, I'm just a janitor and a fireman, right? I clean up the trash, I clean up messes, and I put out fires. But essentially, really, what that role is, as an operative, is a staffer who kind of plays a role behind the scenes, helping to move an agenda along, to help. In the case of cannabis and legalization, it was to take us from a place where we didn't have consensus amongst the Assembly and the Senate. We had some critical stakeholders who weren't on board. It's the ability to kind of bring all those voices together, help find consensus and push that agenda through. And, effective operatives know what levers to pull, to buttons to push at the right times to kind of help move those issues along. For me, I got to the space, I say, my family business was fighting for the underdog. I come from a long history and a long family of people who spent their lives fighting for the underserved, the underprivileged, and those without access. My mother was, she went down in the freedom rides and a member of SNCC down in the 60s. My grandfather was a union organizer for the ILGWU. And so I come from a rich history of what we say fighting for the underdog. Mm-hmm. And so naturally, my first kind of foray into the world of politics was for a labor union, 1199 SCIU, who represented healthcare workers and anybody in a hospital, nursing home, and home care. And that's really where I cut my teeth, where I learned my craft, I learned my trade, how to engage in persuasive conversation, how to build a campaign from scratch, how to take rank and file members or just volunteers and build an operation out of a what starts as a shoestrap kind of campaign, and it can be built into a massive undertaking and operation. And so really cut my teeth there, learned under individuals like Patrick Gaspard, who became the political director for Barack Obama in the White House, and Jennifer Cunningham, who at one point was identified as one of the most powerful women in the state of New York. And so those became some of the mentors that I had to learn under, understanding the power of collective action, the power of really of in numbers, and that's what unions kind of are predicated on, is this fighting and moving in unison. That took me to working on national campaigns. I worked on presidential races. I helped run the state of Florida for Obama in his election. Also worked on gubernatorials, on mayors, helped, Mayor Bill de Blasio get elected and played a major role on that campaign. And eventually ended up in the private sector working for a firm called Capilino and Company. They are the largest municipal lobbying firm in the country, and one of the preeminent firms in New York City. In that firm, I did a lot of work on legislative issues, on real estate development, but eventually, I approached my boss, Jim Capilino, and I said, sir, I think there's a real opportunity in the cannabis space. It seems like this is going to be an emerging industry. And he had the foresight to say, now, here's some money for research and development. Go see what you can unravel and discover. And, to his credit, a lot of these white shoe firms at that time were really keeping some distance from this industry because there still is a stigma attached to it, right? I mean, and that's changed over time. I mean, guys, I remember, and even doing client meetings, there was a time where, you went out to dinner with clients. Maybe after dinner, folks said, hey, let's go get another drink, or, let's go out, let's go, do some stuff. Recently, I've left client meetings where guys say, hey, do you want to go smoke a bong or have a joint, right? And so you see the attitude,
the evolution, and it's changed. Right. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So you're starting to see that shift, and I think my principal Jim Capilino at the time had the foresight to realize this is going to be a big emerging industry. It's emerged, right? And let's be at the head of it. And so we were able to build a successful practice in cannabis. And so about 6 months before the pandemic started, I was approached by the Cuomo administration with an opportunity to join as a senior member of his administration. The position was Deputy Secretary of Intergovernmental Affairs. And, on face value, that role really is a catch-all for all city, state, and federal agencies and elected officials that want to interface with the governor's office.
Busy job, I would imagine.
You can imagine, right?
Catch all for sure. Yeah.
And so part of what I had negotiated as part of that job was to take on the cannabis portfolio. It was a significant portfolio. It was one that, I really believed could be a legacy item for this administration. We had a principal at the time, Governor Andrew Cuomo, who was, starting to think about higher aspirations. And, part of our thinking internally was the coalition that we could build to pass this legislation on a local and then on a national level could be the same kind of coalition that could help deliver him into the White House, right? And bring him to 1600.
Was he thinking about cannabis at that time? Like before you got the role and you said, hey, I want to also consider cannabis. Was that on his plate? Was he?
I mean, look, we had in 2015, the state had passed the Compassionate Care Act, right? And I think that was the medical program that has garnered a lot of criticism, rightfully so. I think, and the governor played an active role in some cases, not undermining the program, but not letting it necessarily reach its full potential, right? And specifically, they didn't allow flower in the medical program in New York. They made 14 specific healthcare conditions that you had to qualify for, so it was really hard to get into the program at first. And so you had less than 100.
It sounds like Texas, yeah.
It was tough, and so you had less than 100,000 participants in the program for the first couple of years, right? And so by the time I get into the administration around 2019, 2020, there's now been some pretty, robust conversation. The year before, things had advanced pretty far, and kind of last minute things kind of unraveled because there were other issues that kind of took precedent. But, the governor had said prior that this was going to be a priority this next legislative cycle. And so we all knew it was. And he had come a long way in his own personal opinions and position on the subject of cannabis, right? And he never said this to me personally, and to any of us, but the way he spoke about it left me with some feeling, some indication that maybe he had a childhood friend or somebody that he grew up with that's consumed cannabis, and for some reason maybe then went into other harder drugs. And so he really had, what I perceived in some cases as a bit of an old school way of thinking about cannabis, right? Like this whole narrative about being a gateway drug was a little antiquated, but it seemed like, again, he never had told me this verbatim, but just from listening to him, some of the things that he shared, that was an experience, that was his perception, was that it actually was a gateway drug. And, to his credit, I think he took time listening to stakeholders, looking at the issue to realize, maybe there are some real medical values here. Maybe there's some criminal justice issues that we need to address as part of this issue. And look, I think that, that even with all of that, we still came close to not passing it, right? And you want to jump into it, quite frankly, had there not been almost this perfect storm, right, of, we went from being America's governor to, a crisis every day. The governor is some pretty like hefty accusations are being lofted at the governor about some of his activities and his conduct. And so, now we are every day in the news being accused of he's being accused of some of these acts with some of the staffers and other external individuals. And so there's a meeting that we have internally where he kind of looks around the table and says, okay, guys, like we need to change the headlines here. We need to change the news. What do you guys got for me? Right? Like, what do you have? And, people are looking around the table, kind of nobody's making eye contact with him. People are trying to avoid, and he's really probing. And at a certain point, he just looks at Axel and myself and he says, what about cannabis, guys? What's up with cannabis? Can you guys get this done? Right. And I think to his, he's extremely politically astute, like real student of politics, really understands news cycles, how to own and dominate a news cycle, a storyline, and was totally, I think, spot on in believing and understanding that if we could make some real progress in cannabis, it would captivate national news, right? I mean, this is New York. As New York goes, right, the rest of the country, and he was right. But the thing here that made this opportunity in this moment so unique is that because there was this other crisis looming, right? This, they were literally trying to take them out of office, out of power. Yeah. And so typically what would happen in those situations, and the way this worked typically is, senior members like myself would help negotiate the legislation and get it to as far as we could, maybe to the 5-yard line, right? And then we would get tapped on the shoulder, and the governor, along with the budget director, Bob Mujica, our two most senior members, would come in and take it over the finish line, right? Especially legislation this large. That didn't happen this time around because they were so busy with the crisis. And so we had a level of latitude that we typically never would have had, right? And so we were able to negotiate a bill that is being touted right now as one of the most forward-thinking, in terms of a social equity-focused bills and progressive bills in the country, right? And I think that's a real credit to the team members that I worked with, to the stakeholders that spent a lot of time in our ears saying, hey guys, you've got to think about social equity first. You've got to think about the communities that were devastated by the war on drugs first. And that, and when you look at other states, a lot of other states kind of thought about social equity after they passed the legislation. What was unique about what we did in New York was that from the very beginning, it is totally intertwined and integrated. It is totally in every fiber of this legislation, social equity rings true to the ledge. And so, we were able to get this bill passed without the interference of some of the higher ups who, in some cases there was a lot of pushback between what the governor had proposed, which was called the CRTA, the Cannabis Regulation Taxation Act, and what the Assembly and the Senate had put forward, which was the MRTA, the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act. The MRTA bill was a lot more social equity focused, progressive focused, a lot less big cannabis, which is what the CRTA was. And so, being able to get the MRTA done, which in the end of the day, from a narrative standpoint and optics, right? Nobody looks back and says, well, that really wasn't the governor's bill. The governor signed it. It's the governor's bill, right?
I want to pause you right there, because that's, I remember.
I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of.
No, it's good, man. This is really good, and there's a lot to unpack. So, what I first want to ask is, I remember reading about that and how the governor's bill, the CRTA, So okay, here's my question. You had that conversation. He was talking about, what big items can we address to kind of get, the news off of this particular issue, right? You mentioned cannabis, and he's all ears. Where did the divergence happen? Why did he propose a separate bill than what ultimately was passed, which is the MRTA?
I think, it's really important to understand the players involved in some of these things, right? I think that it's easy to get lost in these big, big ideas, these big issues, and not connect the dots between who's really behind the scenes pushing this stuff belong, right? And in this story, in this play, in this act, you have Beth Garvey, who at the time was our senior counsel to the governor, and really had taken the file over at when she came on to the administration. Prior to Beth being in the administration, she was senior counsel to the Senate Republicans and the majority, right? Now, one of the big pieces of legislation that was done under her watch with the Senate Republicans was the casino legislation and passing the casinos. And so when you look at the CRT legislation, there's a lot of comparisons with the casino model in terms of how the RFP was set up, in terms of the bidding. The big criticism was this is really focused on big cannabis, on big MSOs, and leaves the small businesses and the Black and brown communities and those devastated by the war on drugs out to dry, right. Out in the cold, right? And that was the big criticism. And if you really, did a deeper dive, what you saw was there was a lot of similarities to the way they structured the casino legislation. And again, that was because Beth was familiar with, right? And that was her familiarity. And so she used that as a model to structure it. And that's kudos to her. I think it forced us to have a very important conversation about our values and what is important as part of passing this legislation. I think, to all of their credit, I think they started at this point, and we gradually moved towards a more equitable, fairer option, and they all deserve credit for that. I think they all were part
that's
of that
how
process.
that's how bills are created, right? I mean, that's how democracy works, is that two sides bring to the table, you work together to kind of make the best outcome for that particular bill. And that sounds like, so this is a perfect segue, because I want to jump into the MRTA, and sure. And I want to talk about, first I want to talk about your experience negotiating the MRTA. You mentioned the autonomy that you had, right? And that's that senior level, or that hierarchy that kind of was displaced at the time due to the crises that were happening. So that's amazing. So I want to talk about that. But then also I want you to shed light on, what you're really proud of in terms of the components of that bill.
Sure. So look, in terms of the way we actually got the negotiation and the bill over the finish line, right? Because, remember, this is all happening in the backdrop of a pandemic, right? Like you still have the pandemic. And so,
but cannabis is essential during that time. So that's
absolutely. It was relevant. And don't forget, the other issue that was looming that was also a catalyst was this, the e-cigarettes and these, these casualties involved in these unregulated products, right? And that was something that we used and was kind of a catalyst to kind of push the envelope, push the needle. But in terms of the process, right, in terms of what that was like, the experience, what's so interesting is you kind of go into these negotiations anticipating what those sticking points are going to be, and what are those things, what are those issues that are going to be real tough to negotiate and going to, potentially the deal can potentially fall through because of. And what's so funny sometimes is it's never what you think it is, right? And so in terms of the way we did it in process, because I was really out in the field a lot during that time, the governor had also made me responsible of the vaccine equity task force. Damn. One of my other responsibilities was getting shots in arms of Black and brown. I spent a lot of time in the field opening up vaccine sites and testing sites. And so, what was the way we were doing it was Axel and Norm Birnbaum were in the room with the Assembly and Senate, right? We did 3-way kind of conferences, and we would debrief at night, kind of saying what was accomplished, what needed to happen the next day, what was the strategy, how we were going to open. And then there were moments of impasse where that's when they would call me in, right? When we got to an impasse, right? And I'll never forget, I don't know how many people actually know about this. I don't know how well reported this is, but the whole thing almost fell apart over an issue that you never would have anticipated, right? Like, we got the revenue agreement done. We got the license, we got all these issues done that we thought were going to be sticking points. The thing that almost felt the deal almost blew up on was, what do you do on a roadside pullover? How do you handle a roadside pullover? Right.
Oh, for like DOI checks, because there's no way to test, right, for law enforcement.
Well, so here's the thing. There actually is now saliva and breathalyzer tests that are starting to go into the field, right? Like, the problem is that there are some false positives. It's like this. The science is still not sound yet, They still need to work on it.
Yeah, because like THC can stay in your system up to like what 60 to 90 days.
So now you're talking about what is inhibition versus an intoxication versus your metabolism still having THC in the system, right? Like those are two distinguishing factors that like we still need to like figure out, because we don't have answers for this all yet, and it's hard because it changes based on the person. Just because I have a certain level of the THC in my blood system, you might have the same exact level. Our bodies will react differently to that, right? And so there becomes it's not so cookie cutter, but essentially the breakdown was at how do we handle roadside pullovers, and at the time there were those in the Senate that felt strongly that we should treat the pullover almost similar as a DWI intoxication. Specifically, if somebody refused the field test or the breathalyzer test, they would automatically receive a suspension. In New York State, if you get pulled over for DWI, and the officer suspects you of DWI and asks you to take a breathalyzer and you refuse, it's an automatic suspension of your license in New York State. And so the Senate wanted something extremely similar to that for cannabis. Crystal Peoples-Stokes, God bless her. So she's our Assembly Majority Leader. She was the author of MRTA, has been working on this legislation for 10 plus years. Represents Buffalo, New York, up in Western New York. Felt strongly. She said, look, guys, this can be used to continue to profile Black and brown men. And I will not allow that to happen. I will not pass a piece of legislation that can be used to further discriminate. Absolutely. Right. And, I remember this one call that I had with her and her chief of staff, and it was like, we've gotten so far. You've gotten everything you wanted. We're right there. Let's just figure this out. And she says to me, child, I've waited 8 years to get this done. I can wait 8 more. And she meant
she knew how important that play
she dug in. She dug in. And so I had to go back to the team and say, guys, we have to figure this out because she's not budging. And if we don't figure this out, this thing is falling through. And so what we ended up, compromising on was a couple of things. It was, we're gonna limit the breathalyzer to a pilot. We're gonna limit it to one county. The county we're going to do it in is a predominantly white county, Republican county. And if somebody refused the breathalyzer in the test, they would receive a $15, $20 penalty, fine, slap on the wrist, but not a full out suspension of license.
Yeah.
Right. And so that that took a day and a half of negotiating, because at that point they had walked away from the tables, right? Like they were no longer at the table. And it was like, Jesse, you need to get them back to the table. And it was like, and that's when I kind of come in and kind of work my magic and specialty and kind of got us back on track and got us to that agreement. And that got the deal done. It was shocking because we thought there'd be 10 other things that would be the problem here. And that was the thing that, ended up getting us over the finish line. And so that was, in terms of my experience, that was like, I think, a nice little anecdotal to like share.
Yeah, like that was awesome,
what
man.
That was like.
I appreciate that. That's what I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of like, what I'm, you said, what are we most proud of as part of this legislation?
Yeah, the components within the MRT. What are you really proud of? Things to call out.
Yeah, look, I think the reinvestment in community, 40% of revenue reinvested in community is quite frankly unparalleled. You haven't seen anybody else do this in the country. I think the program that we're rolling out now with DASNY, the first 150 retail dispensaries are going to go to those that are justice involved, meaning a conviction in cannabis and have owned a business that had net profit for 2 years. That those are the first people receiving our retail licenses, that the state is hiring CBRE to find those locations, lease those locations out, they're paying for design, build, and construction management firms to build those locations out, going to the end user and saying, hey, what's your logo and colorway? You can customize those elements, and essentially delivering a fully built out dispensary store to these end users is unheard of. We've never done anything like that, right? And I think, that's a test. There are those that say it's going to be impossible for us to pull this off. I remain optimistic. I remain optimistic in Ruben McDaniel, the chair, the board member who's kind of leading this effort, and our men and women in government that are behind the scenes kind of getting this thing through. I remain optimistic, and I think those are the kind of things that are going to make a difference in this program and what we see in New York, because there has not been that kind of intentional commitment to this community prior to this kind of effort. Those are the kind of things that I'm extremely proud of. The other things are just our smaller, the fact that, we now have a social consumption program that will allow some form of on-premise sale, which again has not been done in other regions and other markets yet. I think is exciting. I think
you're talking about like cannabis lounges, like where you would be able to consume, on premise.
Correct. That's right. I think those places are, in many ways, in my opinion, just like coffee shops were to the literary world, kind of the places where creativity, where the culture is going to be advanced and cultivated and nurtured. And you're going to see cannabis culture really start to sprout out of those kind of settings. And I think that's really, especially in a city like New York, where culture is so rich. This is the epicenter of the financial and cultural world. At least I think so. I know I'm a bit of a New York elitist, but that's that's the way we like to think. That's the way we like to talk about ourselves, right? And so, to see that happen here, to see what the potential here is exciting. It's just thrilling.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And also another component that I heard about that I just fascinates me, and I think it's in a lot of ways makes a lot of sense in terms of driving competition is vertical integration, vertical companies, right? You can't be vertically integrated in New York.
So this is a really interesting issue. Look, what we learned was that although vertical integration can make a sense for a lot of different perspectives, both business and government from a regulatory standpoint, it becomes extremely cost prohibitive, right? And so what happens is, unless you can put together the 100 and 150 million to build out the infrastructure on top of the 2 to 5 million to pursue the license,
you're out.
You're out, right?
Social equity is not even in the conversation at that point,
And I think what's important when we talk about also the vertical license is people use the word social equity a lot. And it's become one of these words that I've kind of compared to when we talk about the green economy and green jobs. It was a term people threw around, but when you really asked them to go a layer deeper, nobody really knew what the hell they were talking about, right? And so, look, when I talk about social equity, just to be clear, I look at it in 3 different buckets, right? I look at it in reinvestment in community, right? The communities that were devastated by the war on drugs, how are we taking the revenue that's generated from this market and investing in those communities that were most harmed? That's one component. The other component, I think, is participation in the program. How are we now, those communities that were criminalized by the war on drugs, how are they now benefiting from the commercialization of it as owners and operators of licenses, right? In an industry where 6 to 7% of the industry is our C-suite positions are people of color and women, we just got to do better, right? We got to do better, and this is a commitment there. And so participation becomes one. And then the third is really about, to me, is the criminal justice, social justice issue, but is also the workforce development, the workforce training, is the opportunity to now build a workforce of trained, effective, quality individuals that can have careers in this industry, right? And I think those are the ways we need to think about the social equity conversation when we're talking about it as it comes to cannabis specifically. Mm-hmm. And so, I think as we think about it, in New York, right, social equity, the way we were affected in social equity is people that want to come to New York, operators, everybody that wants to do business in New York, all looking for social equity partners now, right? Because what we said in New York was 50% of all licenses are going to social equity applicants, right?
It makes sense. It drives incentive for those people to partner and find those minorities, right? I mean, because they're ultimately going to get those licenses first. That's right. And I think where we want to make sure we're protecting those folks, right? Because what you've seen in other states is they'll find the social equity guy, and then they put together this master service agreement where the economics are not flowing in the social equity candidate's favor at all, right? They're flowing in the opposite way. And so, we wanted to be very conscious of creating a framework that, to your point, would encourage capital to find Black and brown partners
to go in with just pursue these licenses, but Black and Brown maintain 51%, and they have operational control. And you'd be surprised how many. Well, actually, no, you shouldn't be surprised. People have a problem with that, right? Like,
no, they want control, man. Yeah, they want control, and they want the whole piece of the pie. Yeah.
It doesn't sit well with people.
Which is it's sad, right? Because there's so much potential for this industry, a lot of money to go around, a lot of people can eat, right? And so,
dude, I mean, tell me about it. I mean, look, I think two things about that, because I think there is a misperception. Like, people aren't raking in the money yet, right? Like, it's not as profitable as people think, right? Because with 280E, with some of the local taxes, I mean, there's some people are paying 90% tax rates effectively in some regions, right?
Right.
And so that's not, that will happen, but it's not yet there. But I think, in terms of the opportunity down the road, like this, you're talking about, potentially bringing in massive amounts of money. The issue here. So I did a panel at MJ Biz. One of my clients, a gentleman by the name of Vladimir Batista, who is the owner and operator of a business called Happy Monkey, which is a legacy social consumption dispensary in Times Square, or they were. These are homegrown kids from New York. They were originally from Dominican Republic, like grew up in Northern Manhattan, and have built a real cultural brand, a very powerful brand in New York. And they were invited to talk to MJ Biz. They were brought on stage with Pure Relief, with Air Wellness, and the title of it was Clash of the Titans. How does culture and legacy and industry interact, right? Like, how do they work with each other in relationship with each other?
That's super interesting topic.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And so what we did is we actually came back to them and said, look, we really actually, and this was like during the conversation, we said, we actually don't like the way you frame this conversation. We don't really see it as a clash of the Titans versus a marriage of the Titans. And what we meant by that is,
why start negative, right? Like, yeah.
But beyond that, and this is what and MSOs are starting to realize, and you're seeing it, is that the Vlads of the world are the guys that are going to create and deliver the genuine brands, the authentic brands that consumers are going to seek out, right? These are the guys that, the Cure Leafs, when they did the Be Noble brand, right, where they found this social equity guy that did 15 years of jail in New Orleans for 3 blunts, right? Like, they're all trying to look at the cookies and understand, look, guys, we're not selling widgets. This is not a widget. There is a lifestyle, there's a culture associated with these products that if you're not tapped into, it's just not going to work.
Right.
It's just not going to click. And a lot of these guys in the MSOs, God bless their soul, these guys came out of merger and acquisition. They came out of real estate. They came out of banking. They didn't come out of this world, right? And this world is alien to them. And so they're looking at spreadsheets saying, why are we in the red? And totally missing the mark and saying, you guys don't have a brand that really resonates and connects with the consumer. And that's going to come from those legacy guys. That's going to come from the Vlads of the world, from the guys that quite frankly built this industry, right? Like, built this industry from a legacy standpoint. And so understanding, and the point is this, finding a way to bring those guys together will only enhance your product, will only enhance your brand, and enhance your bottom line. And that's the way these guys need to start internalizing and thinking about it, is that don't co-opt these guys. Find a way to help these guys enhance your bottom line.
Jesse, I couldn't agree more, man. And I see that, like, that tone come out so much. Like, on social media, you see the legacy operators and they refer to these guys as the suits, right? And they're saying,
that's right.
And you see on the other side, how these quote unquote suits have difficulty working with some of the legacy operators. And I could not agree more with you in terms of, like, hey, see that other person, that suit, if you want to call them that, as an asset. Leverage their skill set you may not have to push further. And because they're not going away, right? Like you said, all these different groups are converging and they're coming together, and it's not going to change. So we might as well understand how to work with each other, right? And leverage those skill sets.
I mean, so 100% agreed. I mean, look, I was just talking about the value that legacy brings to the suits. But to your point, look, if I was a very successful legacy operator, there are things that I need help with to be successful in the compliant market that I've never done. I've never done 280E tax compliance. I've never done complex real estate deals. I've never done traditional marketing and advertising. right? And so these are all elements that the suits, quite frankly, can also help these legacy guys with. And those legacy guys are going to need help with that, right? I think, yeah.
And and I'm sorry, I'm gonna get passionate about this because like that's the point of this podcast, right? Is to put out education, generate awareness around this industry and the topics that are really issues that matter, like social equity, like social justice, right? And to your point, like even especially with marketing and advertising, I mean, we all will rise as an industry because that messaging is going to be more consistent. It's going to be more concise. The way you're telling your story will be through a different lens than just like, hey, I smoke and here's another session, you know?
That's right.
So
that's right.
I'm with you, man. Yeah, I'm totally with you.
So look, along those lines, and I think, this was a learning experience for me as well, is because I think so much focus has always been about the social equity front is, we got to deploy capital. We need to find a way to get capital deployed, get these guys funded, right? As long as we can get them funded and get money out the door, we're fine, right? And I think we need to take that next step in our evolution and our thinking about this, with understanding that yes, capital is important. I don't want to undervalue the role that money plays in this whole equation, but it's really the technical and legal components of this industry that we really need to help our legacy guys with, right? Like that's where they end up failing. That's where they end up falling short. And the reality is that is extremely labor intensive, right? To take a grown adult, right, who's been successful in their world, in their field, tell them, listen, even though all that success, there are some things you just don't know how to do. Like, how do you tell a grown adult?
And that's okay, you know, and that's okay.
It's okay, right?
Because you know, you can be. I always kind of had this mindset of that, like you can be good or mediocre at a lot of things, but to be great at something, think about it, like pro athletes, they're professional in one sport. Now there's anomalies where like Michael Jordan went over to Major League Baseball, you know, and we see that sometimes, but you have one chance in this life to be great at something, and it's okay to not be great at other things. And that's where a team helps and comes in. You know?
But listen, using that, I played divisional college football, right? And I'll use that sports analogy. Even within that individual sport, what you see is you have like the 15% top echelon, like ridiculously amazing athletes, and then everybody else, right? Like there isn't even there's even a stratification within that same field, right? And you see that in cannabis as well, right? Like there's the cream of the crop, and there's everybody else, right? And I think that, the ability to start to destigmatize some of our preconceptions that we've had or misconceptions that we've had about certain communities, certain individuals that we might not have intimate relationships with and understandings with. Like, we need to start breaking down those stereotypes, breaking down some of those misnomers, misunderstandings about communities. I'm amazed how much people don't know about the benefits of opening up a dispensary in a community, right? Like, when you talk about Black and brown communities, what you have to understand when it talks about the retail side of this is, like, there is trauma associated in Black and brown, or in like low income Black and brown underprivileged communities where, this was a prevalent street activity, where this was on the corner and not in the corner store. There's a lot of trauma involved in some of the violence that was around that. And, my uncle, my brother, my family member getting arrested because of it, right? Like, and so that's a lot of the history and trauma associated, and what we haven't been able to do a good job articulating. And I've seen weed maps do this in some cases, but we need to do this on a greater scale. Is, do folks know that crime actually goes down like considerably, like almost like 20-something% when you open up a dispensary in a community, right? The use of opioids dramatically decreases as well when dispensaries are opened up in a specific geographic area. And so there are actual benefits to this that don't even, I haven't even touched on the economic, empowerment benefits that, like, are the next step, right? Like, part of the work that I've done is organizing in faith-based communities, right? Going to churches and organizing in the church, because I think that's an area that a lot of people have just tried to stay away from mistakenly, right? And you go into the church, especially Black and brown churches, the old women in the church, they want to know Johnny's getting out of jail, Johnny's going to get home, Johnny can get a job. Like, that's the extent of what they care about with this industry. What we haven't done a good job is understanding, like, Johnny can actually Johnny might be able to be an owner of a business. Johnny might be able to build a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Johnny might be able to support and change the future of his family and build generational wealth by doing that. And the whole community can benefit from that as well. And that's where the opportunity lies, is the next step in really educating, that piece of the community, because even our Black and brown politicians, because of their stakeholders, some of them are still a little reticent, right? Are still a little like,
right. And I mean, man, to that example that you just gave, like, think about the rehabilitation opportunities there, right? Like, not just throwing these convicted, felons
that's
like
right,
back into the
that's right,
street and say, good
that's
luck,
right,
try to get
that's
a
right,
job at McDonald's. They
that's
know
right,
this industry. They've been in it.
that's
They've
right.
grown the plant or they've sold it, right? So
Absolutely,
it's almost
absolutely.
like a beautiful circle of
Yeah,
life in a way.
absolutely. It's absolutely circular. And I mean but that's what's so interesting is that because I talk to a lot of legacy guys all the time, right? I talk to them every day because, I like to keep my ear to the ground to hear what's going on. And, the biggest, strongest aversion that I've experienced out of any one group of people to legalization have been a lot of legacy guys, right? Where they just have a lot of pessimism. And beyond that, they don't think it's for them. They don't think it's meant for them to be a part of. That is actually the opposite. It's meant to take away an industry from them, right? And those, we also need to think about that, right? This is an informal economy that depends on some of these industries. We can't just displace like these people. We have to
No,
absorb them because if we
absolutely.
displace them, I promise you, there's going to be chaos that ensues in the streets, right? Like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
We can't forget those people. We need to find, there needs to be a give and take. Obviously, there needs to be a willingness on their side, but
Absolutely.
there needs to be, of course, a plan to make sure that they're taken care of and they're thriving, because this industry is inevitably going to thrive, right?
Agreed.
I want to ask you, Jesse. We talked about the MRTA. So where is it at right now? I know that New York is in the process of launching and going adult use. So where are y'all at in the process?
So we passed. The governor signed the bill on actually my son's birthday, March 31st. He signed the bill, and they've been going kind of breakneck speed since then. So far, what they've been able to roll out. One of the first licenses they rolled out was the conditional cultivation license. That license was really targeted. So let me take a step back. It's important to understand that what's happening right now in terms of the rollout is extremely political. And what I mean by that is from like a market architecture standpoint, like if we're thinking big picture about what we need to do to build a healthy industry, a healthy market, first thing we need to do is start cultivating, and massive cultivation, right? And not just on a small scale, but like on the scale that will meet the demand that this state, quite frankly, needs, right? Like understand last year, we grew roughly 27,000 pounds of smokable legal flower. That's what we grew in the state last year. In order to supply the state this year on these projections, you're talking about minimum 900,000 pounds of smokable flower.
Wow.
And that's not flicking a switch. You don't just flick a switch to do that. You have to build the infrastructure.
Yeah, you got to have all that in place. Exactly.
You got to build the infrastructure to do that. And so, part of what they led with, right? And this is, again, this is why I'm saying this is political versus like what makes potentially most sense from like a market architecture standpoint is they led with the small farmers for cultivation. So there's now been 203 licenses issued now for people that have been growing hemp for at least two years prior to this license being issued. They were hemp growers. They were allowed to take an acre of outdoor, convert that to THC, and a half an acre of indoor, not indoor, it's like greenhouse with only 20 lights. Which is, I don't know how much you know about growing and cultivation.
It's not a lot though, right? I mean,
that's absurd. No, it's almost absurd. That's not, you can't, a 22,000 square foot canopy cannot be supported by 20 lights. That's absurd.
It's impossible.
Right? It's absurd. It's impossible. And so what you need to understand is that what's going to happen. So in New York, we're going to have a supply constraint issue for the first couple of years, right? And so what I call like the Goldilocks zone, where supply and demand kind of meet each other and figure each other out. The flower that these guys are growing, God bless them, look, New Yorkers have a certain level of expectation in the kind of quality of flower that they can smoke. I think I'm a skeptic, but I think a lot of people agree with me. I think the first round of these farmers growing THC outdoors for the first time in New York, most of us anticipate that the majority of what these guys grow is going to be biomass plant material that's turned into extract and oil.
Yep. I think
it's not going to be something that you can put in glass and put on a shelf, right? And so that becomes part of the rub. And so that's like, so you say this makes no sense, but then politically, optically, they get to say, well, we started the program taking care of the small farmer and taking care of those that were most impacted by the war on drugs, right? Because now The next license that's coming out that they're going to issue is what's called the card license, the conditional adult use retail dispensary. And that's only eligible to those that are justice involved, right, that have been convicted of a cannabis-related offense in the state of New York and have owned a business that was net profitable for 2 years, had at least 10% of controlling interest of that business. 150 of those licenses will be issued. The goal probably, and I know this because a little bit of the background, but the governor is probably you can anticipate 5 stores to be open before the election in November, right? Because the governor is running for re-election in November. I mean, that's the backdrop of all this, right? And so when she announced that first sales of cannabis are gonna happen before the election, we all looked at each other and said, how is that possible? Nobody's even growing weed right now. How can we meet that deadline? That's insane, right? Like, that was like what we felt. And then, like, lo and behold, she was just like, look, guys, I don't expect you to have 150 of these things open, but can you get 5 at least, right? Get 5 open.
Right.
And I think they're going to reach that goal. I think you're going to have 5 of these stores open in the November timeline. And so that means, what's going to happen now is the state issued the regulations for the card license. Those now are in. Now we're waiting for a 14-day notice. That notice will be 14 days prior to the portal opening for us to submit that application. Now, what's unique about that application, it costs $2,000 to submit. And essentially, it's an exercise in document retention because the state is getting the sites, right? The state's leasing the site. The state's building the site out. Things like a security plan, the SOPs, operating, those are things that are not going to be necessary as part of this application, right? Like, this is not that type of application. This was intentionally by design meant to make the barrier as low as possible. Still creating criteria that, a lot of people are upset that the state said you have to have a conviction and the business requirement. But, I think rightfully so, the state's handing out licenses that could be worth $65 million a year, right? Like, some of these stores, right? Like, how do they know that they're handing it to people that like, how do they guarantee a likelihood of success amongst these operators, right? Like, right. They need some barometer to say, all right, this person has some business acumen, some past experience in business, and can demonstrate that they can be successful in this business as well. And so that's the criteria. Now, I've scoured the state. There's 150 of these licenses up for grabs. I've only found like 6 or 7 of these guys that qualify, right? So I'm gonna be, let's see if they find 150. I hope they do. I really hope they do. But what's quickly going to happen after that already is you're going to see, you see the packaging, marketing, and distributing regs just came out recently, and that's been kicking up a lot of hubbub. We can get into that.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
But we'll get into it. I just want, because you asked me what's happening. That's coming out. Why is it coming out? Because in order to have a market in November that's going to be able to sell flower on shelves, we need all these regulations out of the way. We need distributor licenses out there. We need processor licenses to extract. And so that's getting out the door as well. What's still looming is the expansion of the medical market. Will they expand? When will the MRTA doesn't contemplate if they will, it says they shall. The question is when and how many. And then when are the rest of the licenses going to come out, right? And I think we can anticipate maybe early next year that getting out, hopefully, or later the end of this year. But I think we all just need to be patient and give OCM the time that they need to get this stuff out. So, all right, so regs, packaging, and the regs and all that. How much do you know about what the state put out? Because it's pretty comical.
Not much. I mean, let's start from the beginning, especially for those that are listening that may not know anything about it.
All right, I don't want to misquote this, so let me pull this stuff up, because this is like you can't make this up. So look, I think, especially in a state like New York, right? Like, New York has such a unique opportunity to like build out what could be some amazing brands, right? Like, we are a state and people who, our culture, the ability to, like, our identity that is replicated and followed around the world, right? Like, this is the place where brands are going to come and sprout. And so to me, it was just surprising that, potentially there's all these limitations on what can come out. So, all right, essentially what they said on the advertising and regular, would be helpful if I just read some of it to you guys?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So, all right. So it says whatever the proposed regs are. It says products that are attractive to individuals under 21 means labeling, packaging, advertising, and marketing that is pleasing or appealing to persons under the age of 21 by using or including, among other things, cartoons, bubble type or other cartoon-like font, bright colors that are neon in appearance, similarities to products or words that refer to products that are commonly associated with or marketed in a manner so as to be attractive to individuals under 21, including but not limited to any limitation of food, candy, soda, drinks, cookies, or cereal in labeling, packaging, advertising, and marketing. Terms candy or candies or variants in spelling such as Kandy or Kandeez are also prohibited. And so from there, I mean, I can tell you,
So that's
cookies,
really limiting.
The lobbyist for cookies got fired, straight up. The guy that was a lobbyist for cookies that dropped, he was dismissed immediately.
Wow.
Because cookies right now can't do business in New York under that reg, right? Like They can't do business as cookies. It's absurd. Look, I think the intention of it was to prevent the marketing and the selling of goods to minors, which I support.
Of course, but I mean, you're choke holding branding efforts by being so restrictive. I mean, it almost sounds, I'm being a little, exaggerating when I say this, but it's kind of like reminds me of Canada, because Canada, right? You have one, like every flower bottle is green, and it's just, there's no branding at all in Canada. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong at all. I think look, it's going to be hard to distinguish between the brands if they do this. We're not going to know which one's which. It's almost going to be identical, right? I mean, I think that's a mistake. And I think in terms of the banning of certain strains, strains like cherry pie, cereal milk, right? Like grandma's cookies, right? Like Girl Scout cookies. Like these are strains that also
those are legit strains. Yeah.
And they have medicinal properties to them, right? So now you're telling me from a medicinal standpoint, I can't have access to them because you're worried that some kid is going to see cherry pie and going to smoke the weed now. It's just like, look, we have to be smart about this stuff, and I support it, but not at the expense of getting access to, like, this is, to me, has always been about access to medicine.
Right.
And what I'd say to you is, I don't know, in my communities, like in my neighborhood, like there's always that kid that each one of us knows that's on his couch right now that's probably smoked 7 blunts today, right? I would argue to you that person is self-medicating. Now, he's not appropriately dosing, but that person is self-medicating, right? And I think we need to be a little bit more aware of what people are using cannabis for, what ailments, and also educate them about how to appropriately use it. But to take away options from them, I mean, the alternative is to seek pharmaceuticals instead, which is we know where that road leads us, right? The opioid crisis touches every part of our community and our city, and so that, to me, I just think, yes, let's be smart. Let's pass sensible rules that limit and restrict, any sales and marketing to minors. But, this just goes way, way beyond the pale to me. And I think to most people, I mean, it's really absurd.
Yeah, I agree. And back to your point earlier about like the opportunity with branding and how branding can really bring the community together and really kind of draw in certain consumers, because, the consumer of cannabis is really everyone who's an adult. I mean, it could be your grandma, or it could be, the college kid hitting a bong in his dorm.
So do you talk to MSOs at all? Have you had conversations with MSOs, any of the MSO players? Because I think it's fast. Like when you talk to them, they only are really focusing on the 55-year-old soccer mom, right? Like if you look at Sunnyside, like you look at Cresco, which is like the Sunnyside retail brand, like their stores are modeled after Sephora stores. Like their products look like cosmetic products. And that's all by design, because they tell you the data says that the 55-year-old soccer mom is the largest growing demographic in legal cannabis, right? Where they don't see, the reason why they don't care about quality in terms of, this is the highest THC or the best quality, is because that's not their consumer. And their consumer, to them, doesn't care about that right now, right? The consumer that does is what they characterize, and I tend to agree, is what they identify as like the top 15% of the total share. The top 15% are that connoisseur kind of consumer that's looking for that high end, the high quality product. That product just costs a lot of money to make, right? Like to build an indoor facility in New York State, it's going to cost you $350 to $400 per square foot to build. It's massive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a hundred square foot canopy. What is a $400 million endeavor? It's insane. That's insane, right? So this is where I think as a again we got to figure this stuff out. We can't afford not to. But we just got to be smart about it, because not being smart about it will guarantee that the illegal market survives, right? Like you look at California, it's 3 times bigger than the legal market right now, the legacy market. That's not going to work. That's not going to work for anybody.
No.
And so, I think, look, and again, I would just tell anybody, like, we have to give the state some time. I think those of us that come from more mature markets, that come from experiences in other older markets, should come to the state and present yourself as a thought partner to the state. Hey, I've been through this already. I've experienced this. Let me help you. Let me leave you with one anecdote that I think is really important. I mean, I don't know how we're doing on time, but
no, you're good. Yeah.
I think this is really important, is because people don't really get this part. When I was in the government, right, when I was in state, if I wanted to know the regulatory impact on the economic, the health of the economy for pine nuts, I can call an economist and they'll give me 35 years of analysis of how regulatory decision will impact the pine nut industry. But as it relates to cannabis, that just doesn't exist yet, right? So when we made a determination that we're going to cap delivery at 25 FTE, full-time equivalent, what did that do to the business? What did that do to the economics of the business? Did we just turn what could have been a $15, $20 million business into a $3 million business, right? When we say micro businesses that can cultivate up to from 5,000 to 10,000 of a canopy and can retail and wholesale, when we say they can only retail and wholesale what they cultivate, what have we done to that business? How are we limited potentially, as opposed to letting them white label and sell other and retail other product as well, right? And so this is where folks that come from other markets that are maybe somewhat comparable, if at all, and say, hey, look at my data over the last year. Let me help you put a pro forma together. Let me tell you how that's going to impact the economics here. Let me tell you what private businesses are going to do in response to that regulatory decision. That's the opportunity that stakeholders have now. And I would say, don't wait. Don't wait until the regs come out. Don't wait until they make a decision. Approach them now. Present yourself. Hey, I have this expertise. I have this experience. I want to be an asset. You're going to find that the state's going to welcome that. The New York State is a state that really, people that want to help, people that want to participate and be part of the solution are always welcome to be part of it. It's the other folks that are flamethrowers and want to throw rocks on the sideline and just complain and not really roll up their sleeves. They're never going to be welcome in the state, but it's those that are willing to be part of the solution that are going to find themselves welcome to be at the table. And so that, and that's what I'm doing. That's the work that I'm working on now, is working with the states to solve some of these tough problems through my clients, right? Through the people that I'm working with to pursue these opportunities in the state of New York.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, Jesse, I think that's a great place to leave it, man. You're a plethora of knowledge. I mean, you're on the front
let's do this again.
Yeah.
Let's do this again, man. This is fun. I really enjoyed this, man. I really appreciate you, man.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate you. And yeah, let's do it again as things continue to evolve in New York. And, man, you guys are really leading the way in terms of what you're doing, rolling out this adult use program. So really excited to see once it launches, and let's do it again.
Thank you, my buddy. And then when is this is not live, right? You can cut this down in the air at a later time, or?
Yeah. I'm going to get it posted probably in about like a week or two. So sweet. I'll send it to you once it's live.
Nice. I'll blast it out, man. And dude, if you ever come to New York, man, hit me up. You're down in Texas, right?
Dallas, Texas. Yep. But I haven't been to New York in a while. I need to get out there with my wife. I definitely hit you up when we get out there.
I went to the Canelo fight a couple of months back.
Oh no shit! You went at was it at the AT&T Stadium, right?
Yeah, they broke the record for that fight. It was like the biggest, it was insane. Nobody was wearing a mask. It was crazy.
You're in Texas, my man.
Tell me about it. Yo, Dallas is fun. I didn't know Dallas is a fun town.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to do. If you like to eat,
Yeah,
drink, and shop, Dallas is
yeah.
the place to be,
It's a
man.
good town. I really enjoyed it, man. So if I'm ever down there, I'll shoot you a line. But yeah, open invitation, man. I'd be happy to take you around and show you the ropes in New York City, man.
Hell yeah,
It's
I
it's a
appreciate
fun
that.
place. Sweet, my brother. Nice to
Right
meet you,
on.
man.
All right, Jesse. We
Take
have
care.
a good night, and thank you all for listening.
Thank
Bye.
you, guys. Bye now.